Hey, welcome to the MMA Vivisection. We are starting an hour late for reasons that I'm not going into. This is Zane Simon of Bloody Elbow. I am with my co-host Connor Rebush, and I believe somebody's been giving me some shit for mispronouncing your last name as
Oh, it's
Rebush.
if I cared, I would have corrected you long ago. Nate calls me Rubush too. Half the people in my life do. My parents have probably called me Rubush before. I
Yeah.
almost thought you were going to forget to dance at the start of the show.
Well, I could. I don't know. I'm not in a dancing mood. Like I'm just
Yeah,
angry because I'm so late. So like I could mosh or something or like slam dance, but I'm sitting down.
do the picking
Like
up change. Do this one. That's a good
yeah,
one.
do
That's my favorite mosh move.
or do like some of that like the Manny Newton dancing that he
Yeah,
does.
yeah.
Yeah,
Hardcore dancing. Yeah, it's good shit. He does picking up change. It's one of
he
his
do,
moves.
he has all the moves. That dude's on top of shit.
He
So
is.
I'm no hate to Manny. He's an awesome dude.
He's high all the time, uh, and he doesn't train, and he's still as good as he is. So you gotta love him.
Yeah, I think he's high slightly less than he used to be. I think to hear him tell it, he's now uh a little less high all the time. But
He's just vaguely high most of the time.
yeah. Anyway, we're here to talk about this UFC Fight Night card coming up here, Cowboy versus Cowboy in Pittsburgh, and it's it's not a good card. Like I'm gonna enjoy watching some of it, but even by like the standards of like, oh, doesn't have a name value, but it's still gonna be really awesome. This is pretty low on that end, even
Yeah,
by
it
that standard.
it has. In fairness, it's been ravaged a bit. It
Yep.
lost John Lineker. It lost who else was on here originally?
Well, it was supposed to be Cerrone versus
This is me. Right.
yeah, versus Means. So it lost Means. Um, it was supposed to be Alvi versus Sarafian, but I don't know how much that fight got a little worse. Versus now Oluwale Bamgbose.
Both of those stand to be pretty crazy fights.
Yeah.
Fairly entertaining. It. Put it this way: it's one of those cards where I have convinced myself that it's better than it is because I've been researching it.
hmm
So basically, what that should tell you is that you kind of have to be a hardcore fan to give a shit about this one.
You have to be an exceptionally hardcore fan to give a shit about this one.
Yeah.
I mean, whenever you have like, there's one, two, let's see. There's three debuting fighters, and then there's one, two, three, four, five, six total that don't have any don't have any Wikipedia page, very low experience. And I believe other than Brunson Carneiro, who are ranked middleweights, which is its own special thing. Oh, I guess Bermudez and Kawajiri are ranked as well.
Yeah.
But it's still like Cerrone is the only like top ranked fighter. There are some guys that are ranked, but they're just kind of ranked. They're not like
Yeah.
gunning for a title shot.
You have Cerrone, you have guys with serious potential, and I would say like that's Bermudez and Cowboy, Oliveira, and maybe Garcia and Strickland, and then you have just mid tier and below.
Yeah. There's a lot of stuff on this card. So we're gonna try to blitz through some of it because I'm running so late, and I got another one of these to do right after it for this Bellator show, and which is frankly the big show this week.
Yeah,
Um,
the
so we're
fight
just
we've
gonna.
all been waiting for.
It is. We're gonna
Kimbo
dive
Kimbo versus 5,000.
Kimbo versus 5,000. Yeah, you know what? I haven't. I need to go listen to your guys' breakdown of it before I dive in.
Yeah.
Mad respect to you guys for breaking that down. Has the new training footage out there changed your perception on it, or the
No,
possibility that Dada might have baby nuts? Like, did that come up when you guys were breaking this down?
no. Well, first of all, it's obviously a Machiavellian ruse by Dada to convince Kimbo that he is in fact shit. But one of the cruxes of our breakdown, and if you're not aware at home, we're talking about the Heavy Hands episode we did this week, where we dedicated the first segment to this fight. one of the cruxes of our discussion was that Dada 5000 is so much better than the average person at fighting, and Kimbo Slice is much better than Dada 5000, and elite fighters are so much better than both of them. That was kind of the tier system we tried to get into.
Yes, Dada 5000 is the exact expression of that guy that your average like dude bro thinks he could maybe take in a street fight and then totally could not in any way, shape, or form.
Speaking of dude bros, just Google Dada 5000 versus Dude, and you'll get an idea of what the average man looks like against Dada 5000 in a backyard brawl. That is a real YouTube video title. That's a real fight. Dude is I couldn't find any box rec records under that name, but that is the opponent. It's a lot of people believe that they're a lot better than they are, or that they would react really well under pressure. Like, the fact of the matter is, Dada is a guy who it would make total sense to have him as your bodyguard, because he could beat the shit out of most people that would ever try to mess with you. He's nobody's idea of an elite or even a low tier mixed martial artist.
Yeah. So on that note, let's move on to this UFC card and Anthony Hamilton, Shamil Abdurakhimov for some also guys that are both better than Dada 5000 and nowhere near elite mixed martial artists.
But somehow less interesting.
So way less interesting. Take this away, make it brief.
That's the weirdness of this fight. I think Abdurakhimov is a fairly good heavyweight fighter, actually. His problem has been, well, he's been very, very infrequent in his appearances in the ring. So I'm not really sure how dedicated he is to the sport or how much he's been improving. It's been like one fight a year for the last 4 years. But he's pretty good. And he was doing pretty well in that fight with Timothy Johnson before getting taken down and kind of suffered an early stoppage. Though he did seem to panic once put on his back. I think he's good enough to beat Anthony Hamilton. Hamilton's greatest asset is the fact that Greg Jackson's in his corner, and he's well-rounded enough to do a lot of things, whatever it takes to win the fight, but he's really not very good at any one of those things. The only thing he really has in his pocket is what appears to be some pretty thudding power in his ground and pound. And you got to get taken down by some pretty sloppy takedowns for him to be able to use that. So I think it's Shamil Abdurakhimov, second round TKO.
Yeah. How much different is that, though, about what we would say about Timothy Johnson?
I think Timothy Johnson is better than Anthony Hamilton. He's not bad. He's got some serious areas of strength.
Yeah, this is one of the, I think the thing I've seen most with Shamil, because I agree, technically, on paper, pretty good fighter. In fact, he reminds me a lot of Damian Grabowski.
Sure.
Where, you watch Grabowski fight on the regional circuit, you see him on paper, he looks like a pretty good fighter. He honestly, he does most things well, and he wins most of the time. But I wonder if, they both end up looking a little, especially physically underwhelming in the UFC. Where, they're just not that big and powerful. And in the UFC, the UFC heavyweight division is nobody's idea of a technical wonderland, but it tends to be full of the biggest, strongest, toughest dudes that they can find.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone there is just this weird sort of wall-like behemoth that can at any point swallow you whole or just fall on their back and then kick their legs in the air.
Yep.
Trying to get up.
There are, a lot of these guys from M1 are heavyweight decision machines.
Yeah.
And that's in the UFC, there aren't a lot of heavyweight decisions. There are still a fair few, enough to make it not worth watching low level heavyweight fights, because a heavyweight decision is the worst decision kind around. But it's the consequences are bigger on this stage. There are guys who just throw bombs and get on top of you and don't stop working. It's just there's a lot more relentless style, it seems, in the UFC heavyweight division compared to that in Eastern Europe.
Yeah. So I have this wonder that, the Rakhimov Johnson fight was a lot like the Lewis, what's his name? Grabowski fight. Is Anthony Hamilton that guy? Probably not. He's probably not quite he's not that guy. He's of like the Tony Johnson, Derek Lewis, where they are just absolutely a lot bigger than they seem even. But he's still big, and when his gas tank isn't failing him, reasonably athletic. But yeah, you know what? I'm just gonna throw a coin and pick the less technical guy because heavyweight's a freak show, and I'll go with Anthony Hamilton here to get a win.
Because why the hell not?
Why the hell not? Odds are very slightly in Abdurakimov's favor. -112 down to -125. Anthony Hamilton +105 down to -110. So exactly what they should be in my eyes.
Yeah.
Next up, Lauren Murphy, Kelly Faszholz. Faszholz is I'm shocked that the UFC found a late notice women's bantamweight replacement for this fight, considering how long it took them to sign their last women's bantamweight fighter. Like, they went a year between signing women for that division, and
they're barely giving the ones they have fights as it is.
Yeah, they aren't giving the ones that have fights as it is. The division's actually fairly booked right now, surprisingly. But suddenly it's like, now you need a fight. Oh, and we've got this fighter right here. It's like, well, why aren't you bringing this person on 4 months ago? This division needs whatever it can get. Anybody. Absolutely anybody. But still, they went out and got Faszholz. Good look for them. I'm picking Murphy to win this. She's much more experienced, faced a better level of competition. What I've seen of Faszholz is she's willing to square up and throw a lot of punches. She even gets a little bit of steam on them, but she's pretty wooden when she does it, pretty straight up and down. Seems like the kind of fighter that even if she's able to swarm Murphy a bit, Murphy can just blast through her and take her down and then outwork her on the ground. Faszholz is very willing to give up positions on the ground and tries to control and lock down, but doesn't do enough to actually maintain that control. So I think it's a fight Murphy should take through skill and just experience, but Faszholz at least looks like a decent athlete that's building the start of something.
Yeah, I think she looks like she's got potential. She has a good poise, more so than most of the other women's bantamweight fighters around. She doesn't freak out in exchanges. She throws good straight shots. She's got a nice clinch game, even if her takedowns are pretty shoddy. She's got a good understanding of head pressure. She throws good short shots, decent takedown defense. It really just comes down to experience here and volume. Lauren Murphy was Matt Riddle-esque, the way that she was throwing and not landing when she fought Liz Carmouche. But she did come fairly close to winning the fight just on activity. And that's the kind of thing that tends to really, I think, give new fighters with low volume styles trouble. So I think it's Murphy by a pretty grindy, gritty, unanimous decision.
Yeah. Odds on this, Lauren Murphy is a heavy, heavy favorite, probably heavier than she deserves to be considering her knack for giving up really crazy decisions. -315 down to -370. Kelly Faszholz, the underdog, +279 down to +250. I think that's a little surprising, frankly. Murphy I like her. I think she can be a better fighter, and I think she's a good athlete, but she is not the kind of person that takes a lot of really easy fights.
No, she's a gritty fighter, and all of her fights are gritty. Like it's always a difficult struggle, just because of her style.
Yep. That brings us to Marion Reneau, Ashlee Evans-Smith, and two fighters maybe on the other end of the poise spectrum. Good athletes, both of them. But yeah, talk about this fight.
Well, I think Holly Holm was kind of a nightmare matchup for Marion Reneau right now. Reneau has actually looked like a fairly good striker given an opponent who will come at her. When the opponent is going to close the distance, like Holly Holm, she's not as good when she has to chase the opponent down. Reneau had showed how helpful that was when she fought Alexis Dufresne, And at times when she fought Jessica Andrade, and Holm showed it when she fought Ronda Rousey. And in her matchup with Holm, Reneau was just the less good range striker. But given an opponent that comes out here, she's okay. She throws fairly good straight punches. She moves laterally very well. Not a lot of small, tight footwork, but she moves constantly from side to side. It makes it very difficult to track her down. So as you're coming forward, you're always being exposed to new angles of attack. And of course, she's got the very dangerous guard. She's pretty good in the clinch too. When it comes to close range fighting, she can be taken down or knocked down. Of course, that's when her guard usually comes into play. But she's fairly decent at creating space and controlling the distance and the pressure inside. I think that those things are right there are her advantage in this matchup. Ashlee Evans-Smith is she's a solid fighter. She's one of the few fighters at women's bantamweight with real wrestling credentials. But she needs to get there first. In order to do so, I think she's not really that great of a striker. She's going to have to slog her way through the pocket, and because of Renault's movement, I think she's going to be eating shots as she does so. Once she gets into the clinch, I think she's going to have more trouble with Reneau than she's used to. She had a little bit of success in her fight with Raquel Pennington, but I would put Reneau maybe on par with Pennington in terms of clinch fighting ability, maybe a little less good, but close. And then if she gets her down, of course, there's the submissions. I wouldn't normally, like, if this were like a welterweight men's fight, I'd probably give it to the wrestling fighter. But since it's women's bantamweight and it's weird and there's these big skill gaps in a lot of the top fighters, I think I have to go with Marion Reneau, just having all of those little skill advantages.
Yeah, it's tough. Like, Evans-Smith she's got a problem in that where she's best tends to be where every other WMMA fighter is best. And that's in the clinch up against the cage. Like,
yeah,
that with the exception of Holly Holm, that is pretty much where every WMMA bantamweight does their best work. And I think she's better there than most, but she's not like
she's not amazing. It's worth noting that, like, saying that a woman is an all-American wrestler at her college, not as a sexist remark, but it's just not the same as saying that there's a man. The depth of skill, like the talent pool is not there. There are not a lot of women who choose to wrestle. So to be a top wrestler in women's wrestling is just not the same. We see that, like, Miesha Tate's a good wrestler for women's MMA. She doesn't compare to even the mid-tier wrestlers with a lot of her takedown technique in men's MMA.
Yeah. I do think Evans-Smith is probably likely to throw more than Reneau at range and try and work more as outside from the outside. She's not going to maintain there. She's just going to end up walking herself into the clinch and probably walking herself into a few counter shots, as long as Reneau actually is willing to throw punches. But yeah, I think what we'll probably see is that Reneau is actually a pretty damn good athlete, like, just purely on physical gifts. And at some point, I expect that'll make the difference when they get in tight, or, if Evans-Smith does try to take her down and they end up scrambling on the ground. I think that's where Reneau is going to have the advantage and be able to do enough work to either get a submission or eke out a close decision.
Yeah, I think a similar thing happened in that Pennington fight. Pennington is just big and strong, and Evans-Smith was not as big and as strong, and she just, at a certain point, could not compete with her physically. So I see what you're saying.
All right, to that end, the odds are in Reneau's favor. She is minus 172 to minus 185. Ashlee Evans-Smith plus 165 to plus 140. I think that's reasonable. I think there's a reasonably good shot that Evans-Smith is just able to outwork Reneau in the clinch and at range and to keep a higher pace than Reneau. If Reneau is not able to find any comfort in her striking, like she wasn't at all in the Holm fight, then it's not unreasonable to think that Evans-Smith could take a decision. The odds shouldn't be that far apart in a fight like that.
And Reneau does have one very big advantage that I forgot to mention. She's working with Rafael Cordeiro still. It didn't come to fruition in that Holly Holm fight, but not a lot of women in this division are working with top coaches like that.
It's true. That's definitely a big mark in her favor, and means, she's only been fighting consistently since 2012, so there's certainly even though she's 38, as I've probably said over and over at this point, I think fighters tend not to. It's not age that so much caps their improvement as it is time.
Mm.
So should be a lot of room to improve as long as her body holds together. That's the end of the Fight Pass prelims. Brings us to the Fox Sports 1 prelims and Jonavin Webb versus Nathan Coy in a fight that I'm glad to see Coy back in this one. Like I'm glad to see that they gave Coy another shot, and I like this fight because I like to see a guy like Coy who's been around forever, is probably near the end of his career, and if he got cut from the UFC, it's probably going to be close to done. I like to see him get another shot, even though he didn't come through in his first chance against Danny Roberts. It's good to see him get another shot here. I think to my feeling though, got to pick Webb to win this one. Coy's best tools are all in as a wrestler. It's all in winning the grinding wrestling battle and forcing that battle. And there's not a lot of room for that in modern MMA. Like, if you're not also going to win either the striking battle or the grappling battle as well, like we saw with Olivier Aubin-Mercier, he was able to win the wrestling battle against Carlos Diego Ferreira, but that didn't count for a whole lot because he couldn't win the striking battle or the grappling battle once it got there. And Jonavin Webb he's a really good wrestler and grappler. He has that game locked down pretty well. He's still a very clunky striker, and he's had some problems with that before. I think, his entry fight to the UFC, who was that against? That was against Kyle Noke. I thought he won that fight, but the reasons that it went against him were that he largely got outpunched when it came to not wrestling. And I don't see Coy having that same ability. No, at least when he wants to throw, is a reasonably decent average MMA kickboxer. Coy is not that. So I think this is really going to be, Coy is going to get the fight he wants and probably lose it because he's not nearly as able to scramble and keep up with the submission game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Nathan Coy he's kind of the bootleg Tatsuya Kawajiri, who's fighting later on this card. Like, he's struggling through in this modern era of MMA, but it is not easy for a wrestler. Yeah. And like Kawajiri, he survives on just this dogged determination to get the takedown at all costs, and that does make him fairly difficult to fight. But it's not like a Khabib Nurmagomedov where he's like tactically letting you stand and attacking different angles and striking with you and using the strikes to open up his takedowns. It's like just diving on the takedown over and over and over again, which is just not that. There's not a lot of longevity in that kind of a game plan. There's not a lot of consistency there. My read on Jonavin Webb is that, he's a very talented prospect. I think he has a ton of potential. But there seems to be kind of this disconnect between his two ranges of expertise. I think he reminds me a lot of Aljamain Sterling. He's a strong kicker, and he is a strong wrestler and submission grappler, but he's not all that comfortable punching in the pocket. And I think he looked a little better there against Kyle Noke. He was a little more willing to counter and throw punches in the pocket, but it was still pretty clear that he struggled in that fight because his range of preference was long distance, and Noke is good there. That's Noke's best range. So when he was in kicking range with Kyle Noke, he was losing to the more experienced kicker. This fight is still an interesting challenge because Coy challenges him in his other range of expertise, which is the wrestling. If Webb needs to rely on his wrestling to win, as much as it seemed he needed his kicks to win against Noke, then he may struggle with Coy, who is the better wrestler. Not the better wrestler, but the more experienced wrestler, a more experienced wrestling-based fighter. I do think Webb's youth and his explosiveness and the fact that he does have a striking game and Coy really doesn't have one at all is pretty strongly in his favor. But I think it's a great prospect type of fight, especially after a tough first loss. Give him another veteran with a slightly different style and see how he adapts to a similar kind of challenge. So I like Jonavin Webb in this fight by decision.
I admit I would have picked. I would be a lot more definitive. I'd be a lot more split on Coy winning this if I hadn't seen that Danny Roberts fight.
Right.
Because I was fairly sure that Nathan Coy would win that fight. It seemed like a perfect setup for him.
I think you and I both picked him.
Yeah, a British boxer that doesn't wrestle very well at all and isn't known as being an amazing grappler for that matter either. And Coy just put himself right into a submission and got tapped out. And Jonavin Webb is a much better wrestler and submission artist than Danny Roberts.
Yeah, not all. Yeah, and though he does jump on weird submissions and stuff, he's not gonna like easily give up his back. He's more likely to dive on a leg lock or something than he is to just get taken down and be forced to play guard. If he's gonna play from a disadvantaged position, it's gonna be one that he chooses, which I think is to Webb's advantage.
Yeah, absolutely. So on that note, the odds are pretty strong in Webb's favor. He's minus 237 down to minus 250. And Nathan Coy is plus 211 down to plus 180. And I think that that's pretty much right on the money.
Yeah, that seems right to me.
And that brings us to Anthony Smith, Leonardo Augusto Guimarães.
This was originally one of the most middleweight fights on the card. It had premier middleweight journeyman Trevor Smith against Leonardo Guimarães, but unfortunately he pulled out. Maybe with dengue fever, we don't yet know, but it seems to be going around these days. Anthony Smith is a good get for the UFC, like to fill out this portion of the middleweight division. I think he's pretty solid. He reminds me a lot of like a Brandon Thatcher, a Ben Saunders, where it's a lot of clinch and it's a lot of long range single strikes. It's a very Thai style of striking that he has. And he has gotten better in that style. Most notably, I mean, a good record of that is that 2 or 3 years ago, he lost to Josh Neer, and this year he beat Josh Neer. He rematched the same guy who gave him trouble and beat him decisively in the first round. Didn't have nearly as much trouble as he did the first time around, and that was due to a lot of the improvements. The first fight, he did a lot of like, okay, I'm out of ideas, and he would just cover up and retreat and just let Neer build momentum and build confidence and find openings and targets to shoot at. He doesn't do that so much anymore. He's better at maintaining the distance. He is better at choosing his range definitively and not just giving opportunities to the opponent, but he's still not comfortable in the pocket. And that is the real danger here against Leonardo Guimarães, because Guimarães is a serious brawler in a very rare sense. Like, he's a brawler in the way that what's the guy who just lost to Misha Cirkunov?
Alex Nicholson?
Yeah, Alex Nicholson. And in that fight, you could see it was kind of headed the direction where, man, if Cirkunov keeps getting tired, Nicholson's still going to be here. This could become really dangerous. Guimarães is that kind of guy. He gets tired because he throws everything with power, but he just keeps on slinging leather after he's tired. Like, it does not have an effect on him. He takes a hell of a punch. He has never been knocked out, as far as I know. And he's actually fought at heavyweight numerous times in his career. He fought a guy by the name of Vinicius Lima just 2 years ago. And Vinicius Lima, not a great fighter, but his nickname is Gigantinho. He's gigantic. He's a big-ass heavyweight. And 8 of his 9 wins have come by KO. Guimarães soaked up tons of punches from him, wasn't hurt, wasn't dazed, and ended up finishing him on the ground. There's not a lot of cohesion to Guimarães' game, but the fact that he just seeks to hurt you no matter what you try to do to him makes him dangerous. So I'm tempted to pick Anthony Smith because he's the better technician and I like technical fighters, but I think I'm going to go with my original pick because I would have picked Guimarães over Trevor Smith as well, and I'm going to go ahead and just double down and say he beats Anthony Smith. I think Smith has not faced a kind of wild man like Guimarães in many of his fights, and I think he may be reminded of the the shock and fear he used to feel when less crazy opponents used to put him in that danger zone.
Man, that's tough. Like, I don't know. Like, Guimarães is such a mess.
He sure is.
Like he is such a hot mess. Like, I remember watching tape on him, and he I mean, he is so prototypically that BJJ guy that has zero way to get the fight to the ground. So he is just going to throw whatever the hell he wants at you. And it's up to you to, like, try and make him do jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, that's why I was going to pick him over Trevor Smith, because he reminded me of Kyle Magalhães a lot. He's kind of Kyle Magalhães, maybe not as physically strong, but with none of the bully issues. Like, you start beating up Guimarães, he gets stronger. He doesn't start to break. So he's a mess, but he's a difficult mess to clean up.
It's true. That I feel, I don't know. I think I'm going to pick Smith just because I don't think Smith has the same kind, like, the guys that Guimarães has been fighting. Like, he's the guy that you wail on him for like 2 rounds and then you get tired and he's still there hurting you.
He's Boxcar Homer.
He is Boxcar Homer.
Yeah.
Very much. And I don't know that Anthony Smith is going to be that guy who gets tired. Like, I feel like he's got the experience at this point where he's one of those fighters, like, he comes from a small camp. He's never had that, like, top level elite training, but he's always been a pretty good athlete, and it's just taken him this long to finally put everything together.
Yeah.
And I feel like he's at a point where he does have everything put together, whereas Guimarães is just so, like, unput together. Like, there will never be an assembly point for Guimarães, know. And I feel like against really low, inexperienced or relatively inexperienced and unready opponents, or guys that are out of shape, guys that aren't used to training and living as fighters for a long time, or who are used to just bullying everyone, he's going to beat those guys. But I feel like Anthony Smith may be past that right now. Like, he may have broken through that to a point that even if he's not going to go on some big championship run, he's like a mid-tier UFC action fighter at this point. And I don't see Guimarães beating those guys. So
yeah, it's fair. It's fair. I should say I was much more confident in the pick over Trevor Smith than I am here. Anthony Smith is a very different kettle of fish. Trevor Smith tends to get blown away early by crazy fighters, so that's what that was predicated on. But it is what it is. I like I said, I'm glad to have both these guys in the middleweight division. It's just filling out my favorite division with more just weird, like, limited or crazy or just nonsensical fighters. There's so many awful style matchups to be had.
Yeah, Guimarães is the prototypical, like, blue collar puncher, basically. Like, the guy who's going to be there for round after round and never goes away and is tired and just gets sweatier and uglier.
I think that should be his style. When Bruce Buffer reads out the fighter's style, he should just announce him as a sweaty fighter. A sweaty fighter from Rio de Janeiro. Yeah,
the Brazilian version of Tim Boach style,
Yeah, kind of.
All right, or Ed Herman, Brazilian Ed Herman. That's like pretty much.
He's not quite as slow as Ed Herman, but there are some similarities. Yeah,
he's not quite as slow or put together. Ed Herman these days is like, something's clicking with Ed Herman these days.
He's far more sloppy, but also faster than Ed Herman. It's kind of a I could talk about Ed Herman all day, so you better move on before.
Yeah, okay. So the odds on this fight: Anthony Smith is a narrow favorite, -135 to -155. Leonardo Guimarães is +133 down to +110, which. You know what? I think it might as well be dead even, like, in this kind of bout. There's
I think
no real sense.
Smith might be a bet on those underdog odds.
No, Smith is the favorite. Sorry.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah, Smith is the favorite. Guimarães is the underdog. Guimarães might be a bet on those underdog odds.
I'm not sure I would bet on this fight at all, to be honest.
No.
It's such a weird fight. Both
No.
fighters,
is there a prop bet for Trash Fire? I don't think there is. But fight is a draw is minus 6,000, or is plus 2,000, 20,000 rather.
Bet on
plus
that. Bet the house on this fight going to a draw.
Plus 20,000. I think that's your Trash Fire bet. Plus 20,000 on fight is a draw.
Bet 1 penny on a going to a draw, and you will make $20.
Maybe. All right. That brings us to Daniel Sarafian, Oluwale Bamgbose. Is this you or me? I've forgotten now. I think it's me.
Sure, sounds right.
All right. I don't like this. I don't like to see this fight, and I think that they are making a mistake with Oluwale Bamgbose. I think that they are going to lose him out of the middleweight division for no good reason. He reminds me a lot of guys like Sage Northcutt and Randy Brown and these other incredibly underdeveloped fighters they're bringing in.
The UFC does not know what to do with them.
Yeah, and so because Bamgbose is a great athlete. Like, he is very obviously a pretty fantastic, dynamic athlete. Very, hits hard, fast, covers distance really well. But he gets tired really quick, and as he gets tired, his game just falls the hell apart. He's a dynamic striker who actually requires and relies on top position to finish guys. And that's a really, really hard place to be because he's not a wrestler in any sense. So in the past, what he's relied on is hurting people badly enough that they fall over, or having them just make a mistake and slip to the ground and fall down, frankly. Like, if they don't get hurt, if they don't go away, he just gets tired and things get ugly and things get sloppy, and that's where he is, And what we saw in the Uriah Hall fight was Uriah Hall. I mean, that wasn't really a fight. Uriah Hall just kind of pushed him down and beat him, and that was it. There was no competitiveness to that bout. And Daniel Sarafian is not an amazing UFC talent. He's not a young guy. He's 33. But he is an experienced fighter. He's one of those guys that we think of as like, oh, well, he came through Tough Brazil in 2013. So he's still kind of a young developing fighter. And it's like, no, he's been fighting consistently since 2006. He hasn't fought a lot, but he's a pretty well-rounded, well-developed fighter at this point who is who is okay at everything. He's not a terrible wrestler. He's not a terrible striker. He's not a terrible grappler. He's not a bad athlete. He does everything decently enough, just not amazingly well. And I think that's, especially the fact that he's hard to hurt. He's a very tough fighter. That gives him a huge advantage over Bamgbose. When Sarafian's lost, it's been because he gets out-muscled over long-term and out-wrestled over long-term, or in that Kunimoto fight just gets caught in a random submission. Bamgbose is not going to do that, and you got to pick Sarafian to win the fight at that point.
Man, I picked Bamgbose, and you're really making me want to chicken out here because there's a lot of good points there. The reason I like Bamgbose in this matchup actually is, and I agree with you, I think this is bad matchmaking. I think it's too much of a risk for a guy with potential to put him against a guy who is pretty much established as a journeyman in Sarafian, but a tough journeyman. I think that these two are kind of similar as strikers. Though I think Bamgbose is a little more natural. He's kind of, what Bamgbose reminds me of watching him is like Emmanuel Newton, except he hits hard. He has this weird kind of janky serpentine movement. Serpentine makes it sound far more graceful than it is, but it's difficult to time and to get a feel for. And he uses these stance switches and laces his opponents with these kicks and comes in with these awkward hooking combinations. He moves his head fairly well when he throws and stuff. There's a lot of pieces in this game that I like. The fact that he's never gone past the first round is the troubling thing. You read the Uriah Hall fight as like an example of him basically quitting. To me, or an example of him being compelled to not have any ideas or not know how to get out of a situation. To me, I think it was just obviously a fight against a very tough journeyman who happens to be very good with ground and pound. I think you.
Oh, we lost Connor. So I'm just going to say that Connor is totally wrong, and don't take him at face value on any of that. And I think he's just way out of left field and has no clue what he's talking about. Well, here he is, right back here to continue. Go ahead.
My read on this, sorry, I have to drop out once a show. It's customary. I just do it on purpose for the tradition's sake. I think to finish Bamgbose from top position, you would have to be that good of a ground and pound artist. I think he looked fairly durable in most of his fights. I don't think he was even really like knocked senseless in that fight. I just think he didn't know how to respond to someone who is kind of Anderson Silva-like in the way that he throws good, strong, straight punches from top position. Uriah Hall is very good in that range. And Sarafian is not really. Not only is he probably not as good a wrestler as Uriah Hall. Granted, Hall didn't need a takedown for Bamgbose to end up on his back in that fight. He slipped. But he's also just not that punishing a top player. He's a submission artist from the top and a kind of inconsistent one. Actually, I think his submission grappling is really best from his back. He's got a really nice half guard, good sweeps and guillotines and things like that. But, he's not going to beat Bamgbose up. So I think that gives Bamgbose more chances to go into the later rounds of the fight. I think if you put these two guys at range, you basically have a guy in Sarafian who just dive bombs across open space all the time. It's the only way he knows how to cover the distance. It's either long single shots and he loses his balance as he throws them, or it's like these strafing 1-2 combinations and he just leaves his chin up in the air. I think Bamgbose is good enough to actually catch him doing that kind of stuff. We'll see, though. I think this is the first fight in which we see Bamgbose get out of the first round, and I picked him by second round TKO. But yeah, your breakdown of why that won't happen really made me want to chicken out because it's a tough matchup for him.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like in 2 years, I think Bamgbose beats Sarafian.
Sure.
Like, I'm happy to say that. But right now, he just and it's not that I think he, quit or looked for a way out or whatever on the ground against Uriah Hall. I just think he's not experienced enough to know how to deal with that, to know how to deal with somebody who doesn't go away, who doesn't give him all the opportunities he needs. And Sarafian is, he's at least good enough to not do that. He's at least good enough to not just fuck up and throw away the fight against Bamgbose. Most likely. I mean, I would have said the same thing when he fought Kichi Kunamoto, but shit, who knows? That was a serious low point for Daniel Sarafian.
Mm-hmm.
And I at least when I've seen from Bamgbose too is obviously his fights haven't gone that long, but when they start getting past a minute or two, and when he started to work, things just kind of go apart.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. Sarafian stays consistently messy for the duration of a 3-round fight.
Yeah. So I think I would pick Sarafian there. The odds are reasonably in his favor, -175 to -210. Oluwale Bamgbose, +169 down to +145. I think that's close, but I do think that Bamgbose is the better athlete. And, I think, like I said, 2 years from now, I think Bamgbose wins this fight. So it's hard to say that it's really close. He's got a serious, well, I would say he's got a serious puncher's chance, but Sarafian's a tough dude. He's only been TKO'd once in 2009. So I don't know. It is what it is. It's a weird fight. That brings us to Alex Garcia, Sean Strickland.
I actually love this fight. And I didn't even love it that much when I when I first saw it. I was like, okay, yeah, some welterweight prospects, but I think it's really interesting. The more I've looked at it, on the one hand, we've got Alex Garcia. I think Alex Garcia is probably the guy that we are supposed to pick in this matchup. I think he's probably the one that the UFC looks at and says, okay, we have a strong, athletic guy with serious punching power and strong wrestling, and he's fighting at a tri-star gym. We have a guy primed for success here. But I think Sean Strickland's a really tough matchup for him. I really think he is. Garcia, as impressive as he can be in a kind of natural sense, he has consistently showed a few problems in all of his fights that I don't seem to really be improving. And I think it may come down to a kind of Diego Brandao-esque mental block. He loves to throw big without setting up his strikes, and he flings himself off balance in the process. He really, when he is forced to reach for his opponent and chase them around, he tends to get really, really sloppy. When he gets the chance to put his hands on his opponent and connect, he looks like a beautifully technical boxer, throws good, tight, sharp, powerful punches. But when the guy is good enough to make him miss, when he moves laterally, when he keeps him on the end of a jab, he starts to look sloppy, and he's very counterable. We saw that in the Sean Strickland fight. Mike Swick even had a fair bit of success jabbing Alex Garcia at range. And Sean Strickland's a lot better than Mike Swick at this point as far as long-range kickboxing goes. Strickland's also a fairly solid defensive fighter. He's durable, which helps, but he's pretty good defensively. He kind of won his fight with Luke Barnett, which I didn't think he should have won, but he kind of got that fight based on the fact that Barnett was having trouble connecting with more than 1 out of every 10 punches. Strickland was parrying and moving his head and sidestepping and evading the worst of what Barnett was throwing at him. And he even dealt fairly well with Santiago Ponzinibbio. And while Garcia has more future potential than Ponzinibbio, more innate talent maybe, he's not as aggressive. He doesn't throw as much volume. He's not that defined of a pressure fighter. And Strickland still dealt fairly well with a much more experienced, much more aggressive, consistently aggressive, and defensively sound aggressive opponent. So I think for Garcia to win this fight, he needs to wrestle with Strickland. And I'm not confident that he will be able to take Strickland down with that much ease. Strickland's a solid clinch fighter. He moves well, as I said. I think he's going to be pot-shotting Garcia on his way in, counter-punching him when he misses, and if not a late finish, because Garcia has been hittable, and I think Strickland has a sneaky amount of power in his hands, I think Strickland takes a unanimous decision here.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of see this as a fight between two guys who were prospects and will probably never pan out, unfortunately. Like, that's harsh to say because, especially for Strickland, he's only 24, but he kind of has that Jordan Meehan feel to me of a guy. I mean, he's been fighting since 2008, and he's kind of looks a lot like the fighter he did when he came to the UFC a couple of years ago. Like, he's just still that same guy. And I really do not like his move to welterweight. And I think that's going to continue to cost him any chance of long-term success because that division is way too deep and tough to fight the way he does. But I would say the same thing about Alex Garcia. Like, he's also a guy, he's a couple of years older, he's 28, but he's also been fighting since 2009. And I'm not seeing a lot of new stuff out of Alex Garcia either. And he does not have a style that's going to consistently get him into the upper echelon of welterweight. Mm-hmm. The biggest thing with Garcia for me is that for as much power as he packs and as clean as his technique can be, he does not have the output or consistency to regularly knock out opponents.
Yeah, he doesn't throw that much. And often when he does pick up the volume, it's a lot of misses.
Yeah. He's not able to find his opponent's chin often enough to be a consistent knockout threat. And Sean Strickland is absolutely tough as nails. Like, he's big and tough and strong and imposing. And, he also has trouble maintaining a meaningful volume. He throws a regular amount of shots, but he doesn't keep up a high enough pace to climb and actually outpoint people for rounds, especially in Ponzinibbio really opened that up with Ponzinibbio has the prototypical striking style that wins in MMA, where it's high volume, high power, really consistent round after round. It's not technically clean. It's never going to be elite. But Ponzinibbio is a dude that is, he's a high tier. He's an upper tier action fighter. And Strickland isn't ready for that. But Alex Garcia isn't that guy either. And Garcia's style is just, it's even less designed to win rounds. That's all there is to it. He does big things, big dynamic moments of offense, punctuated by long stretches of inactivity. And that's not, if that's not going to hurt Strickland, and he's unlikely to control him because Strickland is big and capable and able to scramble well and able to wrestle decently and do all those things, then Garcia is going to be dependent on his ability to outpoint Strickland round after round, and that just feels very unlikely.
Right. I agree.
So I got to pick Strickland as well. The odds are slightly in his favor, -117 to -130, and Garcia, the underdog, +1 or -105 down to +105 or up to +105.
Surprise! I kind of expected Garcia to be the favorite.
Yeah, let me see if at any point he was. Yeah, he was. He opened at -107 and is now at +101. So this is basically, it's not a lot of movement, but odds have gotten a little longer on him over time, and I think that Strickland's worth a bet at that point. I mean, Garcia has the power and the potential. Problem with a fighter like Garcia is, especially with the camp he has and the athleticism he has, guys like that can click at any moment. Like, there could be at some point in his career a fight where everything just suddenly gels, and you're like, oh, this is the fighter we've been waiting for all this time. It happens. It can happen, and the potential is there. Like, we're seeing it to some degree now with Uriah Hall, where suddenly now he is a credible top 10 middleweight after years of being this sort of middling, underperforming guy who can't win rounds. He's never going to be an elite, a belt winner, very likely, because he's still too inconsistent for the top level, but he's a much better fighter than he ever was before.
Yeah, I think the potential's more there for Strickland, actually. At this, I probably would not have thought this before I really started taking a hard look at these guys in preparation for this fight, but I think he has more potential than Garcia at this point, because the things that Garcia lacks are things that I'm not sure experience can give him, and Strickland is the opposite. Garcia, I don't think he's all that durable. I think he got rattled a few times and disguised it fairly well in that Swick fight. He definitely got hurt by Sean Spencer, and while Spencer has kind of got that Rashid Magomedov accuracy hurting you ability, he's definitely not a power puncher, and Garcia was on skates in that fight. And he just doesn't seem like much of a very good learner. Like, at this point, he's not picking up new skills. Like, he may just not be very teachable.
That kind of, like, the teachable part for me kind of feels like that for both of them, but Strickland's style is much more the kind of style that he has the durability along with his size that tends to make me believe we're going to see consistent growth out of him. It's just not quite come right now in the ways that you would have expected.
Durability and youth. So he has time, which, as long as his durability remains, he has time to let experience teach him the lessons that his coaches have so far been unable to. And I think volume and defense, things like that, like counterpunching, things that will help Strickland's style, are things he'll probably pick up. Maybe not to the degree to become a top 10 welterweight, but things he will probably improve on notably in 5 years,
Yeah, definitely. Garcia, I don't know, it'll be interesting because both guys are guys that came in with some hype and have been in a kind of a holding pattern, frankly. Even winning or losing, they're not delivering the kind of performances that make you go like, oh, I'm so excited for this guy.
Yeah, all their fights just kind of look like fights with those guys in them. You're like, okay, I've seen that one before.
All right, so that moves us to the main card now. James Krause, Shane Campbell, and I like this fight. a lot because it's pitting two similar guys against each other. And at this point, I got to say, I think Krause has a lot more to prove to me. Like, I'm really not. I don't know. Like, Krause keeps surprising me occasionally, and then I hear all the people who are like, "Oh, Krause is a top guy. He's really great," and all that, and I'm like, well, yeah, but we've seen him against like lose a split decision to Valmir Lazaro, which I thought was a pretty clean decision, frankly. Like he just lost that fight, and we've seen him, lose to Jorge Masvidal in a fight that was not even remotely close, and so there's some competitive parts to Krause's game, but like he's just a fighter where the things he's good at are very particular and they're not the things that people necessarily want to think he's good at. Like he has some tricky submissions, and that's actually maybe one of the places where he's best. His striking game, like he does some exciting things here and there, and he's had some big flashy kicks, but against good, consistent opponents or opponents who aren't going to be caught out on the feet that much, his striking game is really open to be outworked. Like you give him a steady brawler or, even a more technical fighter, and he just does not compete well as a striker there. And so, it's a question of, is he then a good enough wrestler and grappler to beat those fighters consistently? He certainly did it against Darren Cruikshank. He capitalized on a mistake by Cruikshank, jumped on him, and choked him out. And I wonder, is Campbell that guy? Like, Campbell is another guy who I really was going to be very prepared to be totally underwhelmed by him in the UFC. Like, I saw him regionally. I'm like, okay, here's an underwhelming athlete with a good technical game that is just going to get beat by every bigger, tougher dude that he can't just out technique. Like guys that will just be able to walk through him, pull him to the ground, and outwork him. And is Krause the guy to do that? Because if Krause doesn't, then I think Campbell has a serious technical edge and power edge on the feet here. So I'm gonna pick Campbell. I think Krause. I feel like when Krause wins, it's sort of lightning in a bottle.
Yes.
Like it's like, oh, Darren Cruikshank, he was able to like catch him off balance with this nifty little trip, and then Cruikshank gave up his back, he jumped on it and choked him out. Sam Stout was in a pretty competitive fight with him, beating him probably till late in that fight, and he jumped on a guillotine and choked him out. Jamie Varner broke his ankle and hopped around on it, and still Krause didn't put him away, and then Varner had to quit. And those aren't things that necessarily, to me, suggest repeatable skills from fight to fight to fight. Whereas watching him lose, it tends to be guys like Campbell who are cleaner technical strikers who are just going to sit there and outwork him and outpoint him and outmaneuver him. So I got to think Campbell's that guy for me.
Yeah, I'm with you every step of the way. I think lightning in a bottle is a very good term to describe James Krause because he can be one of those really dangerous transitional submission killers with the guillotine chokes and the back takes, and he is just a very quick and instinctive grappler when it comes to. He has a real nose for the submission opportunities, but he just doesn't have the wrestling or the combination striking or anything to get to the wrestling to make those things happen. He can't enforce those weapons on his opponent, so he needs to knock them down, or they need to slip, or he needs to like take their back standing or some weirdness like that, or he needs to get some kind of weird foot block, which was a really nice twisting kind of steering wheel takedown. I doubt the same kind of thing would work against Shane Campbell, who is like a Muay Thai fighter, and that's kind of a Muay Thai takedown. So I don't know. To me, the biggest X factor in this fight is Campbell's wrestling, because I think if Campbell tries to wrestle with Krause, which I think he very well may, he's been doing it since he's been working on his grappling game, then he ends up in a lot of trouble. I think if he tries to take Krause down, And he could survive it. He was surprisingly good on the ground with Elias Silverio, who was a big, strong, athletic guy, the kind that you suspected might beat him, and he fought very well in that fight. So if that happens, then that's an opportunity, but it's still just an opportunity. And if we go with a consistent game plan kind of approach, because you can't game plan on, oh, maybe he'll take me down and I'll see a guillotine. If we go for a game planable approach, something that is process driven, then I think it's Campbell all the way. Because I doubt that Krause can take him down. I don't think he's a very good wrestler. And if you can't take him down, he's stuck in a kickboxing match with a guy who is just fundamentally better than him. Not only is Campbell just technically better in all of his strikes, but he is tactically better. Krause is almost all pot shots and single strikes. And he's one of those fighters who he expects your respect at range rather than demanding it. Like he expects you to fear the next thing that he's going to throw at you. Like that Jackson Winklejohn problem I've always talked about. He's like, oh, you think a jab's coming? What about a left body? And then before he can do the left body kick, the other guy throws 3 punches at him. He's like, oh, he didn't wait for me to set up my next thing. That's not Campbell. Campbell's a combination striker. He works punches off of kicks and kicks off of punches. He uses knees in the clinch. He does wrestle. He mixes things up pretty damn well. So yeah, I agree with you. I think it's Shane Campbell. If he can keep this one in a kickboxing match, then I think perhaps unsurprisingly, the experienced kickboxer wins.
Yeah, hopefully Campbell does not go the way of Darren Cruikshank and decide that his wrestling is really going to be a core fundamental part of his game going forward, and it is just never a actually good part of his game. That's been kind of a tragedy of its own. Surprisingly here, Krause is the favorite, at least surprising to us, -134 down to -160. Shane Campbell, the underdog, +130 down to +110. And frankly, I think Campbell's definitely worth something there. I mean, it doesn't, I don't see, I see ways Krause could win, but I don't see it as like a clear him being better.
Yeah, maybe Campbell by decision too, because Krause is very tough. Campbell by decision is +415.
Yeah, so there's a chance bet in there, or a solid underdog bet on Campbell, perhaps.
Yeah, I think a pretty safe underdog bet. I wouldn't. Maybe it becomes less safe as you get into the props, but I think Campbell is a pretty safe underdog there.
Yeah, I feel like he is too. And that brings us to Chris Camozzi, Joe Riggs. Take it away. You've been waiting all day for this.
Trevor Smith is no more. He's left this earth. No, he left the card, but we still have Joe Riggs and Chris Camozzi. Joe Riggs is the most middleweight fighter of all time. I didn't even realize this until looking at his resume, and it's crazy because his first 15 or so fights were as a heavyweight, which I didn't realize. But he was a heavyweight, and he even fought at light heavyweight within like the past 3 years. He's insane. And he went down to welterweight, and now he's back at middleweight. So even though he's not always been a middleweight, and in fact, most of his best career accomplishments have been as a welterweight, he is the most middleweight. He's such a journeyman. And the thing with Joe Riggs is you think you know how badly he's going to get beaten until you start to watch him, and he shocks you with how good he is. He is crafty. He is very, very crafty. He is still a hard puncher. He's got that old school style of ground and pound on his side. He's got like the Tito Ortiz elbows from guard where he doesn't play the modern MMA metagame, but it still kind of works for him. And man, he punches when he needs to punch. He shoots for takedowns when he needs to shoot for takedowns. His problem is that one, he's slowing down. He's not as fast and he's not as sharp and crisp as he was. And two, he just gets hurt. Whether in training camps leading up to the fights or in the fights themselves, he gets
cleaning his guns.
Cleaning his guns, he gets injuries, veteran injuries, like the eye injury in the fight with the guy whose name I'm forgetting, Ron Stallings. Neck injury in a fight with Ben Saunders. It's just a lot of these things lately, and then injuries that cause him to pull out of fights. It's becoming tough to count on Joe Riggs getting the kind of tough veteran decision. And when you put him against a truly revitalized veteran in Patrick Cote, he looks pretty clearly underwhelming. He just can't compete with the athleticism of that kind of fighter. Chris Camozzi's not the athletic fighter. He's probably one of the least athletic fighters in this division in terms of speed and explosiveness and sheer strength. But he is a lot younger. He's very tough and very durable. He's similarly crafty. He has a lot of options, and he is what's the final thing I was going to say? Oh, a good distance management kind of fighter. So I think I have to go with Camozzi in this matchup because I don't see Riggs easily route wrestling him. In fact, I see Riggs struggling to get into wrestling range. Camozzi's got a very good southpaw jab. He's got fairly good head movement. He can be hit. His defense isn't perfect, but once you hit him with the same thing one or two times, he learns his lesson and starts to change things up. He's a smart fighter. And I just think youth is really the big thing here. I just don't see Riggs being able to fight. I mean, it's hard to imagine Riggs even making it truly healthy to this fight. I wouldn't not be surprised to hear that he's hiding some kind of injury even now. So I think Chris Camozzi, man, you know what? I even think Mike Camozzi by like a TKO would not shock me. Like running Riggs into something on the feet or hitting.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like Riggs, Riggs isn't, he's not weak-chinned or anything, but it's not like he can't be knocked out.
He's been KO'd plenty of times.
Yeah, he's been knocked out several times over his career. It stopped many times. I mean, the thing with Riggs is that he is an aggressive fighter. Like, he's actually a tough fighter. For as many times as he's been TKO'd or KO'd over his career, Riggs is a very tough fighter. He's a very aggressive fighter. And you look at the losses he has and the ways he tends to lose, and they are the kind of losses that aggression gets you. Standing guillotine or, a second round knockout or slam submission even, and Kimuras and things like that. These are the kind of losses you get when you are working constantly to create offense because you put yourself in bad position. Like, offense opens up your defense. And that, I think, like, it's great. It's what's being a good athlete and being an aggressive fighter at all times is what has made him as successful as he's been over the years. Like, that kind of combination.
Having a distractingly bad tattoo.
Having a distractingly bad tattoo does not hurt.
Brilliant tactical choice there.
But it's the kind of thing that has made him great or very good over the years. But, I mean, yeah, like, I just don't. It's the kind of thing that keeps you beating low-level dudes. It's the kind of thing that keeps you beating Ron Stallings and Mike Brunzulis and Chris Leyva and Josh Caven and Aaron Brink and Shannon Rich and, all the guys over his career. Like, Ron Stallings is probably the best win for Joe Riggs since he beat Nick Diaz in 2006.
Yeah. Here's a good MMA math parallel that just occurred to me. Game plan wise, style wise, Joe Riggs is kind of similar to Tom Watson without the kicks. And without the kicks of Tom Watson, Chris Camozzi would have had an even easier time beating him.
Yeah.
So,
whereas, for Camozzi, Tom Watson is a better win than Ron Stallings.
Yeah,
Nick Ring is a better win. Luis Kanye.
Tom Watson's a very credible win. Tom Watson, certified middleweight journeyman. He's a tough guy.
So, even Dong Yi Yang back in 2010 is a better win than a lot of these guys. Camozzi, most of his losses, Jacare and Rafael Natal and Lorenz Larkin, those are credible losses. Like, I just don't see Riggs being the dude that beats Camozzi right now. And I don't know that Camozzi finished. Yeah, and you know what? Actually, I would pick Camozzi by TKO because Camozzi's not a powerful guy, but he is a guy that when he actually can get somebody hurt, he is a very good finisher.
Yeah, he's very accurate too. He's a very accurate, precise striker.
If he can get somebody hurt, he will start to open up and he will continue attacking them until they are done. So I can see him hurting Riggs and then just staying on him until Riggs is finished, until the ref stops it. So odds on this, Camozzi is the favorite, minus 239 down to minus 275. Joe Riggs, the underdog, plus 231 down to plus 185. I might even say Chris Camozzi's worth something at those odds.
What are they again?
Minus 239 down to minus or up to minus 280.
Yeah,
or
that's not too bad.
Yeah, like Chris Camozzi at 239. Oh, let's see. Camozzi wins inside the distance is plus 166.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't want to go and advise people to bet on Chris Camozzi.
No, I know. I just don't think. I would be pretty surprised if Joe Riggs won this fight.
Me too. I would. Yeah.
That's all I'm saying. But yeah, Chris Camozzi actually, now that I think about it, the idea of Chris Camozzi having like long odds over somebody is entirely ridiculous. So don't take any advice on that, please. Never mind. Scratch that. Rewind and erase. That brings us to Dennis Bermudez, Tatsuya Kawajiri. And you know what? I'm going to keep this simple. Kawajiri's not winning this fight.
Mm-hmm.
Not unless there's a minor miracle. I get that Bermudez has some major problems in his game, especially with defense. But where he does not have major problems in his game is cardio, wrestling, and scrambling. And these days, like you look at Kawajiri in that Jason Knight fight, and even that was kind of a tough fight just because Kawajiri has to keep you down. He has to keep on top of you. He has to keep you controlled, and he has to outwork you minute after minute, round after round. There's no way Bermudez lets that happen.
Yeah, and it's nowhere as easy as it used to be for Kawajiri to do that because getting you down in this MMA landscape is so much harder than it used to be. I mean, he's still pretty good at keeping you down once you're there, but getting there is difficult. And Bermudez is, despite all his flaws, and there are a lot of them, is a phenomenally good defensive wrestler. He has never had any issues defending takedowns. He has often looked freakishly strong in how easily he shucks off takedowns. He kind of has that Chad Mendes vibe about him sometimes when he just gets an overhook. I remember in the Matt Grice fight, I think Grice shot for a takedown. Bermudez had an overhook. He sidestepped to get his hips away from the takedown and just slammed down on the overhook so hard that Grice's body smashed into the canvas and Bermudez ended up in mount. It was like a throw. It was like a 6-inch throw and Grice slammed into the floor. It was crazy. He's a strong guy and a technical wrestler. His problem is that he's kind of like this rote striker who just kind of goes through the motions, and yet he's committed to being right in front of you. So he's pressuring you in your face all the time and going through these rote combinations, and it leaves him vulnerable. But he's pretty tough, all things considered. He takes a lot of bad, nasty shots and still fights through them. And yeah, I just don't see Kawajiri being able to get him down, and Kawajiri can't strike with him. He's crafty. I can't ever count him at 100%, but man, what do you say? You know what? The thing that's really, really struck me while studying Kawajiri's footage before this is how often he gets kneed in the face after failing on a takedown. Like that, I think nothing sums up the disconnect between his striking and his grappling better than the fact that he just, like when he fought Gilbert Melendez, he dives on a leg, misses it, and then Melendez collar ties him, and Kawajiri brings his elbows in and does this like he's in a wrestling match. You're like, man, you're not in a wrestling match. And he just gets kneed right in the mug. Like he doesn't know what to do about it. It's just not this. It's not a fluid game for him, unfortunately. So
yeah,
I think it's Bermudez by decision, maybe a late finish.
Yeah. Bermudez is the favorite, minus 290 to minus 350. Kawajiri, the underdog, plus 289 down to plus 225. That's fine. It could be longer, but I don't think it should be because Kawajiri is such a tough out. But that's solid. Like, Bermudez is a good favorite. That brings us to Cody Garbrandt, Augusto Mendes.
Weird fight. You know what? Actually, I like this fight because it's like a teachable moment for MMA fans. It's a classic grappler versus striker matchup, and I think it's going to end in the exact opposite fashion that this kind of matchup used to end in. It used to be the guy who was the big, strong grappler would crush the guy who was primarily a striker, and I think this fight will illustrate the severe shift in the MMA metagame because it's really hard for me to imagine Augusto Mendes easily out grappling Cody Garbrandt. And Mendes is superb on the ground. There are very few fighters in MMA or even in just the world of jiu-jitsu who can match his credentials and his success in competition. I think he's a third-degree black belt. He's had his black belt for over 10 years at this point. He knows what he's doing.
He's a world champ. I mean, like,
yeah, multiple time national champ, both in no gi and gi. He's superb, but he's just kind of a slugger on the feet. And I think that's going to be a difficult thing to carry off against Garbrandt, who, inexperience aside, is a pretty sharp striker, pretty technical, definitely tough and durable, has good timing, good fighting instincts. The only thing that I would really like to see from Garbrandt in this fight is maybe a little more consistency of jabbing, where as it is now, he seems to think of his jab as like another power punch. He tries to surprise you with it. He tries to shock you with his jab and hurt you with it. And he's not touching you and measuring and blinding you and setting up his other shots with it. And I think for a guy who's not a very high volume striker, just faking the jab more often would really give the illusion of volume and force the opponent to walk into his punches. But on Heavy Hands this week, I was kind of griping about his fight with Henry Briones, and Pat pointed out to me that it actually wasn't that bad of a performance. Briones is a tough vet, and Garbrandt didn't go nuts for the finish. He didn't react like Sage Northcutt and freak out when he realized he wasn't going to be able to knock this guy out. He just kind of took his foot off the gas and earned the decision, and you have to respect that. So I think it's Cody Garbrandt, second round TKO. Sounds about right.
Yeah, I do have pause though, because I mean, I do wonder, I guess I'm not worried about him winning this fight. I think he absolutely will win it. I would be pretty surprised if he didn't. He's been a good enough wrestler and counter wrestler that I think he'll be able to stay on his feet and keep Mendes from taking him down. He's a better boxer. He's just the better fighter right now. Mendes is another very raw talent. And yet I wonder if, I guess my question is, how boring is this win going to be for Garbrandt? If he just kind of coasts to another decision, how exciting is that? How pumped should we be for him as a top prospect? Because that's the question. And the question to me then becomes, as a guy who is obviously incredibly devoted to Team Alpha Male, is he a worse fighter there now than he was before he went there?
I don't know, man. I think maybe it's what he needs. I mean, look at Jimmy Rivera, years of boring wins, another bantamweight who just suddenly is like, all right, I'm ready now, and turns into this killer. Garbrandt may do the same thing. Maybe he needs a couple of just tough, kind of dull fights where he just learns how to win, and then he can go back to taking his chances and going for KOs. But the other thing is, even with Team Alpha Male pretty clearly suffering its dying breaths, wheezing its last, I think the one thing Alpha Male has always had and always will have, so long as Uriah Faber is there, is great wrestling sparring. And I think that's why everyone from that team is such a good scrambler, because you're on the mat with all of these guys. And he still has Chad Mendes and Uriah Faber and Justin Buckles. He still has good scramblers to work with at that gym. So it's hard for me to imagine him getting out scrambled.
Yeah, no, I don't think he will.
Losing the wrestling battle. But I do see what you're saying. It may very well be a pretty dull fight.
Because, regionally, I mean, the thing is that, regionally, he wasn't getting taken down. When he was back over in Pittsburgh, he wasn't getting out wrestled and taken down. He was the prototype of what we're seeing is the modern MMA success of a sharp power striker who had really solid takedown defense. And now that he's at Team Alpha Male, like if he doesn't keep up the sharp power striker end of that, then he's just a guy with solid takedown defense. Like, that's not as good. Like, at some point, that will stop getting him wins.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be my worry. I'm not worried about him losing this fight. I just want, like, he should look good in this fight. And as much as I want to say, you know, yeah, Henry Briones cut him some slack. That guy's a tough vet and hard to put away. He should have looked good in that fight. Like, when we want to talk about guys that are marching to the elite quickly, we want to talk about guys that tend to put on some pretty good fights on the way when they have overmatched opposition. And I want to start seeing some of that from him. Otherwise, he's just another fighter in the bantamweight division, which is fine. But it's, you know, we're talking about a guy who, when he came into the UFC, was hyped as like, oh, this guy's going to be a future title challenger.
Still just 24.
Oh, yeah, no, I mean, I'm not like, I just want to see, like, if he's getting a fight like this, look good, you know? Really try and work the advantages you have.
Yeah,
So,
I see what you're saying.
We'll see. Odds on this are, let's see, Cody Garbrandt is a sizable favorite, minus 331 up to minus 360. Augusto Mendes, plus 289 down to plus 250. So that seems reasonable to me. I expect Garbrandt to win. I would be pretty surprised if Mendes won it. It would probably end up having to be off Garbrandt slipping and falling, or getting, if he's just too passive, getting clocked randomly by something and jumped on. But I don't see that happening. So Garbrandt should take the win. I do not know that I would pick any kind of prop for him to finish Mendes, even though Mendes is a pretty wooden striker who's going to stand in front of him and try to brawl, at least somewhat. That brings us to Derek Brunson versus Roan Carneiro. And this is such a weird middleweight fight to me because, A, it's not our regular middleweight fight. We are not talking about two standard, you know, groups of our standard middleweight mess or morass. Both these guys have something extra to offer. But the fact that it's like a battle between ranked fighters, like Roan Carneiro as a ranked middleweight these days is just such an indictment on that division.
Yeah.
And Derek Brunson is like, I feel like he should be ranked way higher than he is.
Oh yeah, I mean, being ranked off of a win over. Well, curious.
You should talk for a second.
Okay, I will talk for a second. Roan Carneiro, Derek Brunson. The thing that I love about this fight is the fact that Derek Brunson is the lame duck mid-tier middleweight who stands a chance to actually break through. Brunson has successfully fought against elite fighters like Yoel Romero. He struggled when he fought Jacare Souza back in Strikeforce, but it was a very short notice fight. But fighting Yoel Romero, fighting Lorenz Larkin, he has fought good fighters and performed well. So he's clearly not just another mid-tier middleweight. He's got that kind of potential. And the crazy thing about Derek Brunson's record is that he only has two kinds of win. He has first-round finishes and decisions. That's it. Which seems weird, but I think it kind of speaks to his flexibility as a fighter. I think at Jackson Winklejohn, Greg Jackson has this idea of like letting athletic fighters just do athletic things, and that works really well for Brunson. He's not a very clean technical striker. He's not always a beautiful wrestler or submission grappler, but he is diverse, and he will do whatever it takes to win a fight. And he has excellent instincts when it comes to taking a shot. He will respond with 5 good hard shots. Even if they don't land, he's going to push you across the entire cage and make you respect the fact that he can hit you back if you try to hit him. And if you are doing well on the feet, then he's going to get you into the clinch. He's going to drag you down. He's going to stifle you and try and wear you out. He's going to drag on your arms and tire you. And he's also particularly good in the clinch when it comes to landing short shots on breaks in these little spaces. He's good with his grappling in the same way, kind of this transitional specialist. He's a very athletically styled fighter, and I think that's why he, among this whole pack of middleweights, probably has the most potential of breaking through and becoming a real top 5 talent, becoming a serious contender someday. Juan Carneiro, on the other hand, is just like a pretty good version of one of the archetypal middleweight fighters. Phil McKenzie has his different classes, and one of them is BJJ guys with suspect cardio. That's kind of Juan Carneiro. Like he's or BJJ guys with suspect striking. He's this guy whose game is his jiu-jitsu game is really nice, but much like Tatsuya Kawajiri with his submission wrestling, there's just not a lot that makes it happen. He sprawled on a takedown from Mark Munoz to get that finish in the Munoz fight. And if Munoz hadn't gone for a takedown, based on what he showed in the Luke Barnett fight, he might have actually been able to outstrike Carneiro. And I think Brunson definitely can. Carneiro is not a bad striker, but he's an uncomfortable striker. And his striking in his head seems only to serve the purpose of setting up takedowns. When he can't get those takedowns, he starts to fall apart. And I don't think he gets those takedowns on Derek Brunson. I think Brunson moves around at range, throws long kicks at him, maybe pushes him up against the fence and beats him up a little bit. And I think Brunson gets yet another of his two true finish pattern. I think he fits the pattern and gets another first round finish.
Yeah, you're going with him for first round. I could see that. I'm gonna go with Brunson by decision here, just because Carneiro has typically been so god awfully tough over his career. But yeah, Carneiro, like, you look back over even his recent run of success, and he's not fighting what you would consider true UFC level middleweights, like guys that are the kind of guys that tread water even in the UFC middleweight division.
Yeah.
And I mean, frankly, like that win over Mark Munoz is kind of right there too. Like it's not an impressive win looking back, as much as we like Mark Munoz and think he's an awesome guy in the sport. Beating him has given Carneiro a much higher profile than makes sense. And Brunson, like, he's one of those guys that, like, he will actually shut down a decent grappler if that's all that grappler is going to do. He will shut down a decent striker if that's all that striker is going to do. He will shut down a decent wrestler if that's all that wrestler is going to do. And Carneiro fits right into that mold of a guy that Brunson can just shut down. Like, he can just take away the most functional aspects of Carneiro's game and force him to constantly work in places he's not comfortable. So I got to pick Brunson here for the win, and I'm taking him by decision. The odds on this are Brunson is highly favored, -340 to -420. Carneiro, the underdog, +348 down to +250. And that seems reasonable to me. I just, like, unless Carneiro just gets, I mean, he's got a submission chance. Like, he's got the submission version of a puncher's chance, which is that he could just catch Brunson sitting in his guard too long and snap an armbar or a triangle or jump on a guillotine or something like that. But unless that happens, he's probably losing all the rounds and all the minutes.
Yeah, I agree. Or Brunson runs at him like a maniac, like he has in his last two fights, and blows him out of the water. Brunson, the brawler, is a blast.
He is. He's a fun fighter. When he thinks he can just own your ass, he is a fun fighter to watch.
That's what I like about it. I think that's actually the one thing I forgot to say. That's the deciding factor in this fight. I think Derek Brunson is just a hell of a lot meaner than most of these mid-tier middleweights. Like, I think he is just a bastard. And like, when he thinks he's better than you, when he's damn sure of it, he just goes in there and doesn't give a shit about what you try to do to him. He just destroys you. And when he thinks that way, he's right. Like, he just blows the brakes off of his opponents. And that's got to be
like the difference between how he fought Lorenz Larkin and how he fought Ed Herman. Like
or Sam Alvey. Yeah.
Or Sam Alvey, like Lorenz Larkin, he wasn't sure he could beat Lorenz Larkin. And so he had this very careful approach, which was to punch Larkin when Larkin was trying to defend and to out wrestle him when Larkin was trying to punch. And it just kept Larkin off balance the whole time. Ed Herman's just like, fuck Ed Herman. I'm just going to kill Ed Herman.
He's like, they match me against Ed Herman. He's like, he fights like he's offended about the matchmaking. And you also have the fight with Yoel Romero, which was a very good fight from him. So I think it does prove that no matter how he feels about his opponent, he's very good at executing the game plan. I just think it's funny how damn evil he fights when he's certain he can knock this guy out.
Yeah, I mean, same thing with the Brian Houston fight, where it's just like, who's Brian Houston? I'm just gonna run this guy out of here.
He just booted him in the head. Yeah, that's Derek Brunson in a nutshell right there.
So yeah, if he thinks, and we may not know until fight night, like we may not know where his headspace is, but if he just thinks that he can own Roan Carneiro, then it'll be a fun fight for as long as it lasts.
Yeah.
And that brings us to our main event: Donald Cerrone, Alex Oliveira, Cowboy versus Cowboy. And I'm still, I hate to say it because I love Donald Cerrone. Cerrone's great. But Alex Cowboy is much more of a cowboy.
Yeah.
Like,
I think Donald Cerrone rode a few cows or a few bulls when he was a teenager. And he drinks a lot of Budweiser. That's his claim to the title. Alex Oliveira, professional bull rider. You got to give it to him.
Yeah, you got to give him the cowboy nod. Like, whatever else, the dude is an actual cowboy. Dude grew up as a cowboy and then decided to start fighting. Beyond that, Donald Cerrone is just going to have every which way with Alex Oliveira here, and it's going to be a short, sharp lesson for the real but lesser cowboy at the same time.
Is that your analysis?
That's my analysis. Yes, you disagree?
Yeah. I think Cowboy's going to win, but I think it's going to be a surprisingly tough lesson for him. Alex Oliveira is really big. He's really strong. He has what Pat and I a while ago were discussing, like the ideal build for MMA, and I think he may have it. He's got that Conor McGregor, John Jones build. Massive upper body, huge, wide, broad back.
Yeah.
And then just these long limbs, which he can generate power from that torso and cover lots of distance with his reach. He's got really, really good natural fighting instincts. His rhythm is really nice. He covers distance well. He counterpunches surprisingly well for a guy with only about 4 years of experience, which is pretty crazy. If he is indeed 27, he looks like he's about 45, but who knows? I guess that's what a life on the back of a bull will give you. The thing is that if he can get, Cerrone is going up to welterweight here, which isn't always a great sign when a guy late in his career decides to make a weight division change. Who knows? Could be like Ben Henderson, could be a renewal for him. I'm not so sure. The thing is that Cerrone's kind of welterweight sized without his weight cut already. Like, he's not very big. I think that's why he's been able to make so many short notice lightweight fights, because I think even though he's tall, he's very lean and just doesn't cut a lot of weight. Alex Oliveira is massive. Like, Alex Oliveira had no business ever fighting at lightweight. And it's good for his health that he's back at welterweight. He's that big. He looks,
but he's not back at welterweight long term. He's just back for this fight. Like,
yeah, right. But at this division, I think then you have a guy who, especially without the weight cut, might stand to be in there for a few more rounds than he would otherwise, given the short notice. And I think he's probably going to maybe take an early round, or at least give Cerrone some difficulty. I think what it really comes down to, though, is experience, because if you put Alex Oliveira in any kind of prolonged exchange, his noviceness really starts to show, especially on the ground. And I think we really tend to overlook just how good Donald Cerrone is on the ground and how good he is as a wrestler. So I kind of think that Cerrone's grappling at the sides of this one in the third or fourth round. I think he maybe has a couple of back and forth striking rounds with him. Either gets taken down or takes Oliveira down, maybe knocks him down, and then starts to work him on the ground and gets a late finish. But I think it's going to be more of a veteran win for Cerrone than a great fighter beating a prospect.
The reason that I'm much less high on that outcome is that when guys can out-punch Alex Oliveira reasonably cleanly, his punching game just kind of, he throws it away.
Yeah, I'm not super sold on it. I think that the reason Oliveira looked, and this is just guesswork, but I think the reason he looked so flat is that he kept a schedule that would have made Donald Cerrone blush in his first 5 UFC fights. Like, he took 3 fights in the space of 3 months. And then when he had his first fight given an actual 3-month break, he actually took some time off after that. I think it was the KJ Noons win, or no, who was it he fought after KJ?
Joe Merritt.
The kind of underwhelming Joe Merritt win. He took actual 3 months off, had a full camp, and then he looked phenomenal against Piotr Hallman. He comes back with a full camp under his belt and looks just as good as he did in the Gilbert Burns fight, if not better. So I think he's a little worn out or a little overtrained. It's a guess, but
yeah, I mean, I feel like the Merritt fight especially was one where, like, Merritt does not have many tools in his toolbox at all. You know, he's like single, left, right, 1-2 combo, leg kick, maybe a body kick, maybe, and that's about it. No wrestling, no grappling, no other parts to the game. And that was still enough for Oliveira to just be like, whoa, I think I'm just going to try and out wrestle you, dude. You know, like, he still had a lot of trouble with that.
Yeah.
And I think it's just when he has somebody in front of him that can strike him reasonably cleanly, consistently, he just loses a lot of faith really quickly in his ability to throw strikes. In his ability, like, if I throw these big shots, I'm going to get hit really hard. And so he starts to abandon it. And I think once he does that, he's just going to be too predictable. And once he gets predictable, Cerrone is just going to either choke him out or land something brutally hard on him and really hurt him. That's kind of my feeling.
Fair enough. Yeah. I'm interested to see it. I think Cowboy Oliveira has a lot of potential. Like, he's very inexperienced and surprisingly good given that.
Yeah, he really only started his career in 2012. So you're talking 2012, 13, 14, 15. That's 4 years. And he's fought a bunch, and he's doing well. He's big, he's aggressive, he's athletic, he's tough. He's got all the tools that you need to be a good fighter. It's just time. He's even with a good camp, or reasonably good camp.
He's at ATT a lot too, I think.
Yeah.
I hope he sticks around at welterweight. I really do. I don't see the point of getting a guy, like a 200-pound guy to fight at lightweight.
I kind of worry that he might go the who were we talking about that fought Campbell? Elias Silverio could go, where it was like Silverio came into the UFC as a Muay Thai guy, and then it turned out that his Muay Thai wasn't quite that great, so he started depending on his wrestling and grappling ability, and it turned out that wasn't that great either. And
he's already got a much better win than Silverio's ever gotten, though. That Hallman win was not only against a solid fighter who is a pretty good striker, but a very decisive win as well.
Yeah, I mean,
it was a hell of a knockout.
He's already gotten better wins because he's a more fluid, dynamic fighter than Silverio, who tended to be a very plodding fighter. But they also made similar decisions to cut down to lightweight, where they ended up looking really drained and bad cardio. And so I worry that he's going to take that same path, maybe a little better version of it, but take a path where he's going to suddenly just kind of consistently underwhelm because he's trying to adjust to everything at once rather than finding a particular single skill set and doing it at a weight that's not good for him.
Yeah, well, they got Gleison Tebow there at ATT, so they're certainly not shy about letting guys cut way too much weight for a really long time.
Yeah. Odds on this fight, Cerrone, I'm a little surprised at these odds, frankly. At minus 265 to minus 325. Oliveira plus 274 down to plus 210. Now I realize Cerrone just got blasted out by RDA, but this ain't RDA, and the general like short notice, like the Cerrone that comes off a long layoff and fights for a title is not, I think, the Cerrone that fights everyone else.
Yeah, in more ways than one. I don't think Cerrone gets into his head about this fight. He's like, oh, short notice opponent. Yeah, whatever. Welterweight, whatever. It's like it's Cerrone doing Cerrone rather than Cerrone trying to be a normal pro fighter.
Yeah, he's not a guy, and known for it, said as much, and his coaches have said as much, that he's not a guy who is comfortable or happy waiting for fights and waiting a long time and, you know, really sticking with the program and all that. Like, he gets nervous, he gets anxious, he starts to just kind of lose his cool. Whereas if he can just fight consistently and be like, yeah, I'll do whatever, take whatever, he has a much easier time staying in the moment.
With how weirdly antsy Donald Cerrone is, I won't be surprised if after he retires, 3 years go by and then he just dies in a skydiving accident. Like, the guy just cannot sit still. He has to be doing something dangerous all the time.
Yeah, I will not be surprised at all if Cerrone does not have a long, illustrious life after MMA for reasons that are totally unrelated to like drugs or alcohol or poverty.
Reasons of his own doing. Like, he's been like, I'm going to do this, and just falls off a mountain and dies.
I mean, he's already missing half his stomach from an ATV accident.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that. Oh, actually, was that a myth?
No.
Is that real?
Yeah.
He just wasn't getting a TRT thing because of it.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow, I didn't realize he actually had his stomach removed.
Yeah, he had like, that was a big thing going into that RDA fight. RDA was like, what the fuck is up with you saying that, you know, you need to get an exemption like for your stomach because you can't cut weight right? He got an IV exemption.
I wasn't sure if that was real or not, though.
It was like well reported. So unless something big about it being fake has come out since then, it was pretty well reported at the time.
Huh.
And then, you know, I think he like lost half his stomach in an ATV accident not long ago. So, you know, there's ample reason to believe that Cerrone is not may not be long for this world. Not wishing anything bad on the dude, love him, but
that's just risk assessment. We're viewing Cerrone's life as like insurance salesman. We're like, yeah, you're going to want to take out a policy on this guy.
Yeah, I mean, he just released photos like last week of, oh, I rolled my car on the way to training, still went to camp, you know, still went to training, like, whoops.
Normal people don't just roll their cars on like an average day.
No.
Oh, Jesus.
All right. On that note, you can find me on Twitter at DZaneSimon. You can find Connor on Twitter at BoxingBush. That's BUSCH. You can find us both on Bloody Elbow. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. We'll have 6th round for Bellator, not 6th round for this UFC event. There'll be Knuckle Up immediately following this event. Then we'll be getting right back into it with all the stuff for next week's shows. I believe UFC London is right after this, so that's the Anderson Silva latest fight. We'll have Care Don't Care and 6th round or Vivisection and all that stuff for that as well. So thanks, everyone, for tuning in. Give us a like, subscribe to MMANation.com, and we will see you next time.